Hello, we're back, and in this video lecture, we're going to talk about some of the other finer points of the hospital outpatient payment system. Okay, we talked about how there's status indicators, and it sounds very cut and dry, but of course there are different provisions. There's discounting. So for status indicator T procedures, they're discounted when we're doing multiple procedures in the same hospital outpatient encounter. The first procedure is paid at 100%, and all the other ones are discounted 50%. Sometimes services and procedures are interrupted. So we have modifier 73, a surgery that's discontinued for a patient that was prepared for surgery, taken to the operating room, but before the administration of anesthesia. These services are paid at 50%. There's also modifier 74. So if we discontinue a procedure after we administer anesthesia, and we've already started the procedure, we pay it at 100%. And then we have modifier 52, reduced or discounted at physician's discretion. This is 50% as well. And then we have other carve-outs on the right-hand side on this slide that are the high-cost outliers. And these are unusual, not routine services that are very, very expensive. And we'll see a look at some of these. And these are kind of the outliers, if you will. We also, and I'll start with the section in the middle, we have the cancer hospital adjustment. And these are facilities that are considered designated cancer hospitals, and they have reporting requirements to CMS on cancer data. They need to have a cancer registry and all these other different types of things. So these specific provisions allow these cancer hospitals to be reimbursed at a higher rate since they're taking on this additional resource-intensive service of being a cancer hospital. On the left-hand side of the slide, we see the rural hospital adjustment. And this is for like a hospital that's the only one for miles and miles around. And so as a result, since they're taking on a lot of people from such a large area, they get an adjustment for that. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we have the pass-throughs. And these are for supplies, things like different radioactive isotopes, biologicals, what have you, that are accepted, an exception to the PPS because they're so expensive. And there's different ways that some of these services can qualify for this, if you will. And let's take a look at figures 7.4, 7.5, and 7.6. And this is kind of familiar. We have the hospital outpatient respective payment system, and we have geographic factors. It costs more to live in some parts of the country than others, so we can have a bit of an adjustment that relates to wages and what have you. And when we adjust for the area wages and then the non-labor, right, then we have the adjusted conversion factor. And then after we do that, we adjust for how complex the service is. So we have the APC relative weight and factored in with the conversion factor for all the geographic things that we looked at above. Then we have all these add-ons, as you can see over here, the things we just talked about. 7.1% add-on for rural, children's hospital, hold harmless, right? So in other words, You have these payment rates for these cancer hospitals and what have you. And then if there's a high outlier, we add on to that. And that's all I have for you. Please stop by office hours if you have any questions about any of this material. We'll see you online. Bye now.